Japan breaks every rule of modern economics: slower growth, shrinking population. Yet its society runs with impossible precision. How can a country that should be struggling feel more advanced than those booming on paper? The answer will change how you see the future. When you land in Japan for the first time, something unsettling happens. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in the kind of quiet, precise way that makes your brain pause and whisper, "Wait, what is this place?" You step off the plane expecting the usual chaos of international travel, the noise, the disorder, the friction. Instead, you enter a world that feels impossibly synchronized, as if the entire country is following a script you've never read. Your train arrives at the exact minute it promised to. The station hums, but no one pushes. People line up without being told. The city breathes in a steady rhythm, and you can't shake the feeling that you just walked into the future. Only a future that moves gently, like it has nothing to prove. And then the paradox hits you harder than any headline ever could. Here is a nation often described as living through a long era of slower growth. Yet everything around you works with a clarity, a calmness, a precision that feels almost supernatural. It doesn't make sense. How can a country that expands at such a gentle pace run with more accuracy than places sprinting ahead? Why does a society labeled low growth feel more refined, more predictable, and more efficient than many high-growth economies? It's almost unsettling, because it challenges a belief many of us grew up with: the idea that speed equals progress. In Japan, speed isn't the hero. Stability is, care is, rhythm is. You don't notice it at first, but the longer you stay, the more it gets under your skin. A clerk bows even when no one watches. A stranger hands you the wallet you didn't realize you dropped. A vending machine stands on a quiet street corner, untouched, trusted, glowing softly in the night like a small beacon of order. Nothing screams, nothing breaks, nothing competes for your attention. And somehow, that's the most shocking part. For American viewers, especially those raised on constant motion, constant updates, constant reinvention, the contrast feels almost spiritual. Back home, everything moves fast. In Japan, everything moves right. It's a different kind of modernity, a different kind of success, one that doesn't chase applause but earns respect through quiet excellence. And it forces you to ask yourself a question you didn't expect. What if the future isn't always loud? That's why Japan feels like a mystery worth decoding, a country that appears to operate in slow motion, yet functions with an elegance most fast-growing nations can't replicate. And this mystery is only the beginning, because behind this calm surface lies a deeper story, one about culture, systems, history, and the invisible choices that built a society where the small things hold everything together. Japan's calm exterior is so striking that many visitors assume it's a kind of magic, an inexplicable harmony that just happens on its own. But nothing about Japan's precision is accidental. Beneath the quiet streets and orderly train platforms lies an invisible engine made of habits, choices, and an almost spiritual respect for how individual actions ripple through a society. To understand why Japan still works so well even in a slower growth era, you have to look past the surface and study the machinery underneath. The first layer of that machinery is culture. Not the postcard version, not kimono and temple culture, but the micro-culture of responsibility that plays out dozens of times a day in the life of an ordinary person. In Japan, the default assumption is simple: your behavior affects everyone else. That idea may sound abstract, but its consequences are remarkably practical. A commuter adjusts her umbrella so it doesn't drip on others. A teenager waits his turn at the crosswalk, even when the street is empty. A worker straightens a public chair before leaving. These tiny acts, repeated by millions, form the lubrication that keeps a massive society running without friction. It is everyday citizenship, done quietly and without applause. The second layer is Japan's relationship with process. Where many countries chase speed, Japan chases consistency. Systems are designed not for short-term efficiency, but for longevity. Trains are maintained with surgical precision. Public facilities receive regular upgrades long before they fail. Even old technologies, ticket machines, elevators, simple household appliances, remain dependable because Japan values reliability over novelty. This doesn't mean Japan avoids innovation. It means innovation must earn its place. Everything new must integrate into a structure built on trust and predictability. Then, there is service. Americans often describe their first experience of Japanese service as uncomfortably good because it reveals how much tension they had learned to accept back home. In Japan, service is not performance. It is presence. Restaurant staff anticipate needs before they are voiced. Station workers apologize for delays measured in mere seconds. Customer service doesn't try to charm you. It tries to protect your time. And when a society values time that deeply, the result is efficiency without aggression, helpfulness without ego. But perhaps the most powerful part of Japan's invisible engine is something less tangible. Collective rhythm. In the United States, systems often feel like battlefields. Drivers competing for space, customers competing for attention, workers competing for resources. Japan operates differently. People move around one another like they are sharing the same breath. They don't rush to be first because being first isn't the point. The point is flow. Social harmony is not about everyone being the same. It's about everyone understanding that their choices impact the stranger beside them. That shared awareness shapes behavior more effectively than any law or sign ever could. And when culture, process, service, and rhythm intertwine, they create a nation that continues to function with extraordinary stability, even during decades of gentler economic expansion. Japan is proof that systems can be powerful without being loud, that progress can be measured in fewer breakdowns instead of bigger booms, and that a society can run smoothly not because people are forced to care, but because they choose to. This invisible engine isn't an economic strategy. It's a philosophy of living, and it explains why Japan's calm isn't fragile. It's engineered. Japan's calm, deliberate rhythm didn't emerge simply from cultural habits or meticulous systems. It was shaped quietly, but profoundly, by a moment in history that forced the entire nation to reconsider what it meant to grow, to build, and to trust. To understand Japan's present, you have to travel back to the late 1980s and early 1990s, when the country experienced one of the most dramatic shifts any advanced economy had ever faced. Not through war, not through collapse, but through a kind of awakening. During the bubble era, Japan felt unstoppable. Real estate soared, stocks surged, and optimism stretched across the nation like a rising tide. People spoke about the future as if it were guaranteed. A horizon filled with endless expansion. Yet beneath the excitement, something fragile was taking shape. A belief that the good times would never end. When the bubble finally burst, it didn't just send asset prices crashing. It fractured that sense of certainty. What followed wasn't chaos, but a long, deep breath. A collective pause that reshaped how the country thought about ambition and risk. The crash didn't turn Japan fearful. It turned Japan reflective. Households learned that caution was not pessimism, but protection. Companies learned that resilience mattered more than rapid expansion. Individuals learned that security wasn't something you chased in the market. It was something you built through discipline, savings, and measured choices. In the United States, crises often produce political tension or cultural fragmentation. In Japan, the response was quieter but more transformative, a shift toward intentional stability. The country didn't lose its capacity to grow, it simply refused to gamble its future on volatile promises again. This new mindset shaped behaviors that still define Japan today. Families began saving more than almost any other developed nation, not out of anxiety, but because prudence became an inherited value. Corporations started carrying large cash reserves, not as a sign of stagnation, but as a shield against another era of uncertainty. Consumers learned to buy less impulsively and value the long-lasting over the flashy. In many ways, Japan became the world's expert in avoiding unnecessary turbulence. It's not that the nation slowed down, it became selective about what was worth accelerating. For many Americans, especially younger generations who witnessed the shockwaves of the 2008 financial crisis, rising student debt, and waves of economic instability, Japan's story feels strangely familiar. But what makes Japan unique is how it translated its lessons into long-term societal behavior. Instead of swinging between extremes of boom and bust, the country set its sights on steady footing. Instead of obsessing over short-term metrics, it embraced the idea that a durable society requires a foundation thicker than enthusiasm. The bubble era also taught Japan that growth is not only economic, it's psychological. When the ground beneath your feet suddenly shifts, you either spend your life chasing solid land, or you learn to build it. Japan chose to build. Slowly, carefully, deliberately. It didn't return to the exuberant optimism of the bubble years, but it did something far more impressive. It constructed a model of national resilience based on memory, discipline, and a refusal to repeat past mistakes. And that's why Japan's slower growth era feels so different from decline. It is not the story of a country drifting aimlessly. It is the story of a country that lived through a moment of excess, absorbed the lesson, and rewired itself with a new sense of balance. A society shaped not by fear of the past, but by wisdom earned from it. In Japan, the lived experience of a slower growth society is far more revealing than any chart or statistic. It's not something you grasp from headlines about demographics or economic cycles. It's something you feel the moment you watch daily life unfold at eye level. Because Japan's story isn't just about what the country earns or produces. It's about how its people choose to move through the world, and how a nation can design life around human well-being rather than perpetual acceleration. Walk down a quiet street in suburban Tokyo, far from the neon rush of Shibuya, and the first thing you notice is the stillness. Not silence, but stillness. The kind that suggests life isn't being pushed forward by force, but carried forward gently. Elderly residents tend small gardens with the calm focus of people who know time is not an enemy. Children walk to school without supervision, weaving through neighborhoods designed not only for convenience, but for safety and trust. Every gesture, every interaction feels like an echo of the same idea. Life should not exhaust you. This is where Japan's slower growth rhythm becomes something deeply human. A society can choose frantic expansion, but it can also choose thoughtful balance. Japan chose the latter. And that decision reshaped lifestyles in ways that are subtle but profound. The rise of solitary comfort, what many now call Ohitorisama, captures this shift perfectly. In Japan, being alone isn't a sign of isolation. It's a form of autonomy. Solo diners fill ramen counters without hesitation. Travelers book single-seat train cabinets for quiet journeys. Cafes offer hushed corners where one person can sit, read, breathe. In a world increasingly overwhelmed by noise and constant social demand, Japan's acceptance of solitude feels like a rare kind of generosity. It tells people, you don't have to perform to belong. And yet, behind this comfort lies a more complex emotional truth, shaped by decades of societal change. Young people aren't withdrawing because they lack ambition. Many are simply choosing to protect their energy. When work becomes demanding, when living costs rise, when the pace of global culture feels chaotic, Japan's environment becomes a refuge. A place where the world's noise softens, where life doesn't feel like a competition. At the same time, Japan's aging society reflects not just a demographic trend, but a moral priority. The country invested heavily in public health, caregiver support, accessible infrastructure, and technologies that assist rather than replace. Hospitals integrate robotics to aid overworked nurses. Convenience stores serve as micro-hubs for daily living, bridging gaps for older residents. Public transit remains so reliable that a missed train still feels like a rare event. These systems don't rush people. They respect them. Technology in Japan isn't loud or flashy. It doesn't interrupt life. It blends into it. A ticket gate that opens seamlessly. A vending machine offering warm drinks on a winter night. A sensor guiding a wheelchair across an intersection. These small pieces of design are reminders that innovation can be quiet and still profoundly kind. What emerges is a society built not on the pursuit of constant economic momentum, but on the belief that dignity and predictability matter just as much. That human beings deserve systems that support them, not stress them. That the quality of a nation's daily life can be a form of progress, too. One that doesn't show up in GDP numbers, but reveals itself in the softness of ordinary moments. In a world chasing speed, Japan shows what it feels like when a country chooses to center its people instead. Japan's present is often described as unusual, but its future may be something far more consequential. A preview of the direction many countries will eventually take, not because Japan is ahead in speed, but because it's ahead in experience. What Japan has already lived through. Slower population growth, rising longevity, shifting work cultures, and the emotional fatigue of constant pressure is exactly what much of the developed world is beginning to face now. And instead of breaking under that pressure, Japan adapted in ways that challenge our assumptions about what progress truly means. Around the world, nations are grappling with aging demographics, worker shortages, burnout, and a growing sense that endless acceleration may not be sustainable. Japan reached that crossroads earlier, but rather than trying to outrun the future, it negotiated with it. It chose systems that preserve stability over systems that chase momentum. It built infrastructure that protects citizens from unpredictability. It invested in technologies designed not to replace humanity, but to support it. And in doing so, Japan created a model of resilience, one grounded in the idea that a society's strength comes not only from growth, but from its ability to stay functional when growth slows. That's why Japan feels increasingly relevant to the United States, where younger generations are redefining success and wrestling with the emotional cost of rapid change. In Japan, people learned that a society doesn't collapse simply because growth becomes steadier. Instead, it evolves. It recalibrates its priorities. It finds new forms of balance. Japan didn't abandon innovation, it reshaped it. Automation became a tool to lighten workloads. Compact cities reduced stress from long commutes. Public systems were refined so daily life wouldn't depend on relentless population expansion. These are lessons other nations may eventually find unavoidable. What makes Japan's future story compelling is not only its economics, but its psychology. A country that once feared losing momentum now understands that the future may belong to societies that can weather uncertainty without fracturing. Nations that maintain trust when pressure rises. Nations that treat community as infrastructure, not ornament. Japan's slow, steady approach to daily life, once misunderstood as stagnation, now looks like a form of foresight. A recognition that modern challenges require not just innovation, but emotional intelligence and systemic compassion. For Americans watching Japan closely, its path raises a deeper question. What happens when a country stops defining success purely by acceleration and starts defining it by the quality of its everyday experience? What happens when dignity, order, and predictability become just as important as economic metrics? Japan's example suggests that the future may not be dominated by those who grow fastest, but by those who build systems that remain intact when growth becomes harder to sustain. Japan is not perfect. No nation is. But what makes Japan extraordinary is its ability to continue moving forward with clarity, even when the world insists on measuring progress through speed alone. Japan's future, quiet, calculated, resilient, offers a counter-narrative to the global obsession with winning the race. It suggests that the next era of development may reward countries that keep life livable, not just profitable. Countries that invest in human-centered technology, countries that build for stability in a time of volatility. In the end, Japan's story points toward a new definition of progress, one where societies advance not by running faster, but by learning how to endure, how to adapt, and how to create a life that remains steady when everything else speeds up. If the rest of the world is indeed moving toward the challenges Japan has already faced, then perhaps Japan isn't behind at all. Perhaps Japan is quietly illuminating the path forward.